Hello and welcome back to this channel. In this video I'm going to talk about how to make strings in Vital, strings like the ones I was playing right now here on my keyboard, or a bunch of other possible strings. And I'm not really gonna make one patch and tell you this is the way to do it, but I'm gonna try to make you understand what makes a string patch, and especially how to use Vital to make a patch like them. So let's get going. So here we are with Vital and our wonderful Budsy sawtooth with which we can start from to make our timbre. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you for starters is that I will not really be striving to make a deeply realistic synth string patch. I mean, actually a realistic synth string patch for sure, but not a realistic strings patch for, well, several reasons. One of which is that it is kind of pointless today, since I suppose anyone has access to some decent sample libraries for them, which make the whole process a lot simpler, since there are a lot of other possible solutions to get them. But, it's still something interesting to make an ensemble stringish sound, which maybe won't fool anyone, but it can take the same role in a bunch of possible composition and musical contexts. In the 60s, there were the so-called string machines, which were a lot of instruments, an early electromechanical keyboard, which had its big share of success. Mostly somehow it was the cheaper version of a mellotron for many, and there's been a recent one, kind of recent, I mean in the last decade, it was the Waldorf Streichfett, which replicated the behavior of those. And I'm first of all trying to go towards that, trying to replicate something which is a string machine. So how do I do that? Well, the main point is, let's first of all get rid of some of the buzz, because we don't want it to be that buzzy. We're good with a sawtooth wave. I mean, for one reason or another, bowed strings do produce all harmonics, as we might imagine, and so a sawtooth wave is probably the way to go. I just move the attack without mentioning it, because you might imagine, you don't want to expect. I mean, you might want the attack to be shorter if you were trying to do, some string stabs, like, zum, 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 an orchestra doing like that, which you can, but it's not the patch I'm trying to go for at the moment. And we have this thing, which, well, with a very, very big stretch of fantasy, might sound like a solo violin. So what is the problem here? What is missing? It is missing, a sense of ensemble, a sense of it not being a single source, a single thing sounding. And how do we do that? Well, the easiest way, and the one we will go for eventually, is just raising the unison. Today it is just a no-brainer. We have unison, which is one of the most commonly abused parameters in most videos I see. But a little bit of unison is the way to go a lot of times. But I'm going to take a more old-school approach and wonder, what if I cannot use unison, or if I don't want to use unison? Well, one way is just having another oscillator and make sure it's not perfectly tuned to the first one. I just removed the phase randomization because at least I want timbral consistency. And then let's say I'm just getting a little bit of a detune here, and I have to send this to filter 1, or it will just buzz around. See, we have something slightly better, but you can hear this beating. And what is it? Yeah, of course, we have all the various harmonics going in phase and out of phase, and then creating this movement in volume and in timbre, which is somehow what we want, but it has the problem of being too static. It is always the same. It happens exactly always at the same time and with the same intensity. How would we get it to be not so static? Well, we could use an LFO to modulate this, for example, or even better, since we have them, we could use a random generator. So I will get a random generator, put it here. Let me put this back to normal. Let me reduce the amount of detuning induced by this random generator, because one semitone is really a lot. Let's make this bipolar. because we might want it to go high and down, and just stepping a little bit away from our old school approach, let's make it stereo. We're already quite close, aren't we? So now, not so much. I'm going to put a little bit of release on my amp envelope because, well, it does make sense to not have, you know, the note stop immediately as soon as I release the key. And this is a very simple and computationally kind of cheap way of making some strings. You might want to add a lot of more flavor, like for example adding a little bit of envelope on the filter. You might want to control the filter with the mod wheel too. This is really the way I would go, because, you know, to control somehow what some would call the articulation. Yeah, it's too much, you know. When I get too high, it gets too synthy. I mean, maybe we might want this thing to be a little bit slower. Now, what else can we do? A lot of things, really. So one thing is making this whole thing velocity sensitive, maybe very velocity sensitive. Why? Because these are strings. I might want to be making very soft notes and strong notes when we need them, and we want them to sound at different volumes. Another thing we might want to do is adding a little bit of vibrato. It isn't really that much of a classic, but it can help. So how do we do that? I would get here from the Advanced tab and use LFO1, which I'm not using for anything, to control the tuning of the whole synth. I could go oscillator by oscillator, but I really don't see why I should. And then I'm gonna get my pressure to control the amount of this thing. And then I'm gonna mess all these things up, like say, put this in seconds because we don't really care. See, now this is set to 0. And then I'm gonna get the aftertouch again to control also the speed of this. Now, there's people who just like to set their vibrato to a certain speed. I really like it. And actually, I do want this to be bipolar. I might actually want this to be stereo as well, but it would become a lot messier. But maybe a little more modulation free amount. Yep. And so we have something which is a little more playable under the fingers and can be more expressive. We might, going back to the thing I was saying again, say, hey, who tells me I need to make 2 different patches for, you know, soft and slow strings and heavy, fast synth tabs? I don't really. I could get the velocity here to control this attack and make it this way, reverse, and then maybe make the attack much more important than get here. So that now if I... But then and I can have, you know, a chance of making both. Now, I might want, if this sounds bigger, I might want the detuning to be more important on my big stabs, and it would be a much more complicated thing to do. Anyway, this is somehow the way. Now, is this the only way? No, there's a lot more. Say, for example, if we're trying to do something akin to pulse width modulation, we can do it in this complicated and convoluted way. We could just use the pulse from this menu. And there's no reason really not to, except maybe we might want to do something else with this, but it's typically not something we would need trying to make, you know, strings or something like this. So I might want to add some pulse width modulation here. Or maybe even this, add some phasing, some stereo effect on my LFO. and this creates even more of this sensation. Or I could, once I've done all this, or I could have skipped all this, but I think it's even better to do a little bit of this and then add a little bit of unison. Let's say 3 to 5 voices. Let's say 3 here and 5 on the other one. Why am I doing it like this? You see, these ones are those who are a little bit more detuned. Let's go 5 voices here, and maybe, just maybe, since it's oscillator 1, we'll get even a little bit of distortion spread, so that we have this pulse width changing from copy to copy of the oscillator. Now we have this massive 20% detune. We want it to be a lot less pronounced. And then here, let me see how it is. See, I'm programming blindly. I mean, I just don't know much better than you how it's gonna sound. Not bad, I think. Not bad, really. Now, from here, you know, I've been doing all this thing, thinking like a synth Nazi from the olden days and saying, hey, I don't have effects. But really, in the 80s or in the 90s, the most important, most critical thing into making a convincing or at least effective string ensemble patches was having a good chorus. The Juno synths from Roland or the Elka Synthex were pretty famous for that. The Elka Synthex was weird, you know, it had a chorus which did not have knobs. It only had 3 settings, like 1, 2, and 3. And if you tried to make a string patch and you set it to 3, you were there for having what, you know, quite an experience. Now, here we do have a chorus, so why not? Let's put some chorus. We could, how much chorus do we want? I mean, our sound is already pretty big, so a 16 voices chorus could be a bit tacky. I mean, I could go a little bit lower. Let's go for 4 voices chorus, maybe 8. Okay, let's go for 8. Let's make it even slower. Let's make it a little deeper and reduce the spread. I don't want the chorus everywhere. Let's put it just, you know, in the mid and in mid highs, and maybe a little less. I think it's kind of convincing. Now, up to now, this has only been, you know, it's a string machine patch, you know, maybe convincing, maybe, you know, it might have a lot of good things. I'm kind of happy with this patch, but it sounds nothing like some real strings. And why is this? Well, because some real strings are a very complicated thing. You know, physical modeling of a thing like that is, I would say, a little short of a nightmare, because you have a lot of resonant structure, the behavior of the bridge, and even the fact that, you know, if you wanted to have how a violin sounds from a couple of speakers, you would be wondering, you know, how it was recorded. Where the microphone was the microphone, or where the microphones placed around that violin to record it. And because it is totally non-homogeneous, there is no such a thing as the sound of a violin from a pair of speakers. So we need to know, we need to do some approximations, and we need to give up making everything as it could, because it is really impossible. Now, one thing we can do, though, is understand that a mechanical structure, beyond having, you know, its harmonic series, depending on how it has been played, what has been done on the neck of the violin itself, has, you know, it has a series of fixed resonant peaks. You know, it has what some would call a formant structure, and we can create it. How? One way, getting out of the synth, as I will do in a bit, is going through an equalizer. Why I'm gonna do it outside of the synth? Don't I have an EQ here? Yes, I do, but this EQ only has 3 bands, and they're definitely not enough. I could go, you know, doing some mirror climbing and use the filter, and then even the effects filter, and then using these 3 as 3 independent resonant bands. But it's, you know, I have no way of turning this and this into bells. These 2 are either low shelf or low pass or high shelf at high pass, and so no way. I mean, I will have to go for an outside EQ if I want to go the EQ way. But I have a thing here, which is the Formant filters. These are not what they're intended to do. I mean, they're intended to emulate the sound of, you know, the formants of the human voice, but there's really a lot of things you can do with them. You know, you can change where these peaks are, you can spread them out, you can get them here. Let's get a lot less peak, a lot less. Let's get mix, which isn't really 100%. Want it to be just a little bit, you know, just a little bit of EQing, not really. And then, well, I really don't have a clue where I'm going. I mean, well, not bad. I mean, I would say I don't have a clue. I kind of had a clue. I had an idea of approximately where I wanted them to be. I'm way happier than I imagined. I mean, I didn't think it would come this nice. And now, well, what else? You can add some reverb, maybe just cutting some lows out of the reverb, maybe add some delay, not too much delay, maybe reduce it a little bit. And even this here, we might want it to be just right out here. And maybe more reverb and more chorus within the reverb and even lower chorus. And let's see. I'm very happy with this patch. I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna call them video strings because I made them during a video. Now, right, of course, now it doesn't understand it. Now that I've done this patch, I'm gonna go again and go to the EQ idea. Let's turn this filter off and we get to our previous patch. And you see here I had prepared an EQ8 patch. I'm gonna move Vital away so that you see how it's shaped like. See, it's not really the prettiest EQ curve ever, but you know, getting our sound the way it was earlier, it was like this. Now if I put some of this EQ curve on, yep, you will agree with me, it sounds a lot more like an ensemble of violins. You see, why I'm saying violins? Because that's, I mean, I found it on a table, actually on an article by Gordon Reed, exactly about this topic from Synth Secrets, a series of articles which was on Sound in the early 2000s. It's still there, it's wonderful, it's a gold mine of information. It's overwhelmingly and unbearably nerdy, but if you spend some time trying to make sense of it, there's a lot to learn. And he was just, you know, showing what the typical response, I mean, what the typical structure of the formants in a violin are. And I tried to replicate that as quickly and dirty as I could in this EQ8, and this is the result. See, this is with the EQ, and this is without. You will agree there is quite a difference. In the amount of somehow perceived realism of the patch. So there's actually, if you really want to get deeper about it, there might be a lot more to say. There's in current normal synth language, I mean, most people would do a string patch which has some, as I said, some filter envelope, which isn't realistic at all because, you know, strings don't do that. But still appreciate, it can still be appreciated and used in how, how these sounds are used today. I mean, no one in the right mind would really try to make some actual strings out of a synth. But you might have a sound which is somehow more real than a bunch of recorded samples being played back by some sampler. It's some sound which is genuinely what it is. I mean, yeah, it sounds kind of like some strings, but it is in reality a couple of oscillators, a filter, an envelope, an LFO, two LFOs, a random generator. It's a bunch of, it is somehow more organic. I mean, it might sound ridiculous. Someone would say, what the hell is this guy talking about? But yeah, it sounds a lot more organic to me. And this is why I would go for these rather than actual orchestral strings in most situations. I mean, unless I really, really need them to sound like they're real. If you want to recreate the sound of violas and cellos and double basses, you have to go for completely different EQ curves. And probably if you want to make them all together, you would need several patches, because you need, the notes being played in the violin section to go through this Formant structure. The notes get go to the cello, had to have their own Formant structure and everything, and that, you can't just do that in one patch. So I will not do it in one patch here. So, thank you for staying with me this long. I will not zoom out again and make myself all the window, and I will tell you thank you, and hope you learned something interesting and enjoyable. And since you're here, please do subscribe to the channel, and maybe leave me a like, leave me a comment. And if you feel like, check out in the descriptions, there's all the patches from my Gumroad. I'm probably gonna put this patch up there too, and just, for you, maybe some time, not immediately, but when I have this and a bunch of other patches from videos to upload, I will put up another free pack of vital patches from my YouTube videos. You can find them from the previous, the ones from the previous videos already, and a bunch of premium packs which are getting rave reviews from all the ones who got them. Everybody's really happy, and I'm really proud of them myself. I mean, I'm very happy of that work. So if you want to support the channel a bit, just subscribe. If you want to support me a lot, buy some patches, or go to my Bandcamp and buy some of my music. I'd be really happy with that too. So, having the video about the strings done and the mandatory self-promotion done, it's time to say goodbye, and see you in the next video. Enjoy!